The notification tone on Sophie's phone chimed as she balanced her 10-month-old daughter Lily on her hip, trying to sort through yet another stack of past-due bills. Her stomach knotted as she calculated how many extra shifts she'd need to cover rent this month. The email subject line made her pause. Exclusive catering opportunity. One night, $2,000. Sophie's finger hovered over the delete button, suspecting another scam, but desperation made her open it anyway. The message was brief, professional, and from Rivera Elite Events, a legitimate high-end catering company she'd applied to months ago. They needed emergency staff for a private event this Saturday at the infamous Blackwood estate, owned by someone called Mr. Romano. Staff must be punctual, professional, and discreet. No phones allowed on premises. Background checks required. Sophie frowned at the strict requirements, but the compensation would cover 3 months of daycare, if she could find someone to watch Lily. Sophie called every babysitter in her contacts, growing increasingly desperate as each one turned her down. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was visiting family. Her cousin was working, and agency sitters charged almost what she'd earn. Lily babbled happily, oblivious to her mother's mounting panic, clutching the worn stuffed rabbit that hadn't left her tiny hands since Sophie's brother had given it to her before his deployment overseas. "Just this once," Sophie whispered, making the decision she'd promised herself she'd never make, bringing her daughter to a job. The event coordinator had mentioned staff quarters where Lily could sleep while Sophie worked just a few rooms away. The confirmation email arrived with a non-disclosure agreement and detailed instructions. The event was a private birthday celebration for an unnamed VIP client, and all staff were explicitly forbidden from interacting with guests unless serving them directly. Sophie signed the electronic forms, pushing away the voice warning her this was too good to be true. The promised payment had already been deposited as a 50% advance, more money than she'd seen in her account in months. A follow-up message included a dress code, black pants, white button-up shirt, and a note that a car would collect her at 4 p.m. Saturday. The level of organization and secrecy surrounding a birthday party seemed excessive, but Sophie couldn't afford to ask questions. As Saturday approached, Sophie prepared meticulously, ironing her outfit, packing Lily's bag with extra everything, and rehearsing how she'd keep her baby quiet during the event. This job could change everything if she did it right. The sleek black car that arrived was nothing like the staff shuttle Sophie had expected. The driver, stone-faced and silent, opened the door to reveal sumptuous leather seats and tinted windows that screamed wealth and secrecy. "Is there a problem with bringing my daughter?" Sophie asked nervously, when the driver's eyes flickered to Lily. The coordinator said there would be staff quarters where she could stay. His only response was a curt nod before closing the door. The drive took them out of the city and through imposing iron gates marked with an ornate R, where security guards checked credentials before waving them through. Sophie glimpsed manicured gardens stretching into the distance, and a mansion that looked more like a fortress. Staff entrance was through a discreet side door, where an efficiently cold woman in a tailored suit checked Sophie's ID and pointed her to a small but luxurious room. "You can leave your child here. The monitor connects to this earpiece. You'll be serving champagne on the terrace in 30 minutes. Sophie reluctantly settled Lily in the provided portable crib, surprised by the thoughtfulness of the setup, complete with baby monitor, changing table, and even Lily's favorite brand of formula. Someone had done their homework, which was both impressive and unsettling. The ballroom where the party was being held glittered with crystal chandeliers and flowers that probably cost more than Sophie's monthly salary. Guests in couture gowns and bespoke suits mingled, their combined net worth likely exceeding the GDP of small nations. Sophie moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, offering champagne flutes from her silver tray, while keeping one ear tuned to the baby monitor. The earpiece remained reassuringly silent as Lily continued her nap in the staff quarters. Every server had been assigned specific zones, and Sophie noticed her area seemed deliberately centered around a particular group, distinguished-looking men in expensive suits, who spoke in hushed tones that fell silent whenever she approached. The birthday celebrant had yet to make an appearance, though Sophie overheard whispers about the boss and Mr. Romano, with tones of reverence and fear. She kept her eyes down, remembering the strict instructions against engaging with guests. Just as Sophie turned to replenish her tray, the room's energy shifted palpably. Conversations halted, and all eyes turned toward the main entrance where a man now stood, tall, imposing, radiating authority without saying a word. Dominic Romano surveyed his domain with piercing dark eyes that missed nothing, nodding almost imperceptibly as guests rushed to pay their respects. When those eyes locked with Sophie's across the crowded room, a jolt of recognition hit her with physical force. At that exact moment, the baby monitor in Sophie's ear erupted with Lily's frightened wails. The champagne flutes on her tray rattled as dizziness washed over her, the room spinning wildly as she fought to stay conscious, and failed. Sophie's consciousness returned slowly, sensations filtering in one by one, silk sheets beneath her fingertips, the scent of expensive cologne, and sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. This wasn't her cramped apartment with its secondhand furniture and perpetually dripping faucet. Memory flooded back in disjointed flashes, champagne flutes, glittering chandeliers, a pair of dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. She bolted upright, heart hammering against her ribs as one thought eclipsed all others. Lily. "My baby," Sophie gasped, throwing back the covers of the enormous four-poster bed. Her server's uniform had been replaced with a silk nightgown she'd never seen before, raising alarming questions about who had changed her clothes while she was unconscious. The bedroom door swung open before she could reach it, revealing a stern-faced woman in a maid's uniform. "Mr. Romano requests your presence in the main parlor," she stated flatly, as if Sophie's panic was an inconvenience rather than a mother's terror. "Where is my daughter?" Sophie demanded, her voice rising with desperation. "I'm not going anywhere until I see Lily." The maid's expression didn't change as she gestured toward the door with cold efficiency. Sophie pushed past her, barefoot and frantic, following the sound of a familiar laugh that echoed down the hallway. The giggles led her to an open doorway that revealed a sunlit room filled with more toys than a department store. In the center sat Lily, happily stacking colorful blocks under the watchful eye of a man whose presence commanded the room, even while seated on the floor, in what was clearly a bespoke suit. Dominic Romano looked up, his expression unreadable, as his eyes locked with Sophie's. "Mine now," he said quietly, placing a protective hand on Lily's back. The simple phrase carried the weight of an irrevocable decision, rather than the opening of a negotiation. Sophie's legs nearly buckled beneath her, as rage and terror warred for dominance. "You can't just take someone's child," she whispered, voice shaking with the effort of controlling her volume to avoid frightening Lily. "I already have," he replied, his tone conversational as he helped Lily balance another block on her tower. "And legally, at that. The paperwork giving me temporary guardianship was among those you signed yesterday." Sophie's mind raced through the documents she'd hastily approved, remembering fine print she'd skimmed in her desperation for the advance payment. "That's not possible," she insisted, though doubt gnawed at her certainty. "You'll find I rarely deal in impossibilities, Ms. Collins," Romano said, rising smoothly to his feet without disturbing Lily's construction. "Only inevitabilities." The marble floor felt cold beneath Sophie's bare feet as she stood frozen in the doorway, calculating her options. The distance to Lily, the likelihood of reaching her before Romano could react, the unknown number of staff members who might intercept them before they reached an exit. "Your confusion is understandable," Romano continued, moving to a sideboard where he poured himself a glass of amber liquid. "Perhaps reviewing our connection will clarify matters." He gestured to a leather portfolio on a nearby table, which Sophie cautiously approached and opened. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing her brother Michael in military uniform standing beside Romano, both younger, both smiling with the easy camaraderie of men who trusted each other with their lives. "Michael saved my life in Kandahar," Romano explained, watching her reaction closely. "He extracted my team when no one else would attempt the rescue. Before he died, he made me promise to look after his family, you and Lily." Sophie's fingers trembled as she touched the images, memories of her brother's vague references to a friend with resources suddenly taking on new meaning. "He never told me who you were," she whispered, trying to reconcile this information with the man before her. "Your brother understood discretion," Romano replied, his voice softening slightly. "He knew my position made open association dangerous for those I care about." Sophie finally looked up from the photos, studying the man who claimed this connection to her brother. "And what position is that exactly?" she asked, already suspecting the answer from the whispers she'd overheard at the party. Romano's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's say I manage certain business interests that operate in regulatory gray areas. My associates call me Il Protettore, the protector." The euphemism might have been amusing if not for the deadly seriousness with which he delivered it. "So, you're a criminal?" Sophie challenged, her fear gradually being replaced by indignation. "And you think that gives you the right to trick me? To take my daughter?" "I think Michael's death gives me an obligation," Romano corrected, his tone hardening slightly. "One I've neglected for too long while having you watched from a distance. Your eviction notice last week forced my hand." Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. The letter had arrived just days ago. How could he possibly know about it, unless he'd been monitoring her life closely? The invasion of privacy was as disturbing as the abduction. "This arrangement is temporary," Romano continued, glancing at Lily, who was now happily examining a stuffed elephant larger than herself, "until you're properly established with suitable housing and sustainable income. I have several legitimate businesses that could use someone with your qualifications." "My qualifications?" Sophie repeated incredulously. "You don't even know me." She backed away from the portfolio, needing distance from the evidence of a connection she hadn't known existed. Romano crossed to an elegant desk and retrieved another file, this one considerably thicker than the first. "Bachelor's degree in business administration, minor in hospitality management. Exceptional references from your internship at the Harrington Hotel before Lily's birth forced you to leave." He flipped a page with disturbing familiarity. "Your student loans total $87,000. You've been working 3 part-time jobs since Michael's death covered his share of your mother's hospice care." The clinical recitation of her life's struggles hit Sophie like physical blows. "Stop," she commanded, surprised when he actually complied. "This isn't protection. It's stalking. Protection requires information," Romano countered, closing the file. "I've respected your independence as long as possible, but your situation has become untenable. Michael would never forgive me for allowing his niece to live in such precarious circumstances." A memory suddenly surfaced in Sophie's mind. The baby formula in the staff quarters had been Lily's preferred brand, impossible to know without detailed surveillance. "The job offer was never real, was it?" she asked, the full extent of the manipulation becoming clear. Romano had the decency to look slightly abashed. "The payment was real. The need to observe you up close was also real. I needed to confirm my reports about your character before bringing you into my home." "Reports? From who?" Sophie demanded, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Mrs. Chen's convenient absence, her cousin's sudden unavailability. Had Romano manipulated those circumstances too? Instead of answering directly, Romano crossed to a built-in bookshelf and pressed something that caused it to slide sideways, revealing a hidden surveillance room. Multiple monitors displayed camera feeds from throughout the mansion, but one screen showed footage Sophie recognized with a gasp, her own apartment building's hallway. "You've had someone following me," she whispered, horrified by the violation. "For how long?" Romano's silence was answer enough, and fury propelled Sophie forward until she stood directly before him, fear temporarily forgotten. "I want to speak to my brother's commanding officer," she demanded, grasping at the one person who might verify Romano's claims. "I need to confirm this supposed promise before I believe anything you say." Romano's expression shifted subtly, respect flickering briefly across his features. "Captain Reynolds is expecting your call," he said, offering his phone. "He'll confirm everything." The 10-minute conversation that followed demolished what remained of Sophie's worldview. Captain Reynolds spoke with clear admiration of both Michael and Romano, confirming they'd served together in a classified special operations unit before Romano returned to family obligations in the States. "Your brother made Dominic swear on his life to protect you both if anything happened to him," Reynolds explained, his voice crackling over the secure line. "He's a man of his word, Sophie. You can trust him with your life. Michael certainly did." As Sophie ended the call, she felt the weight of her brother's final decision settling over her. Michael had entrusted her safety to this man, believing it was the right choice. But could a promise made in a war zone justify what Romano had done? 3 days passed in luxurious captivity, with Sophie mapping the mansion's routines while pretending to accept her situation. The estate operated like clockwork, guard rotations at midnight and noon, delivery trucks on Tuesdays and Fridays, staff meetings every morning at 8. Romano had been unexpectedly absent, called away on urgent business the morning after their confrontation. This temporary reprieve gave Sophie the space to plan, watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity while spending her days with Lily in the lavish nursery. The security system was sophisticated but not infallible. Sophie had noticed the east garden door remained unlocked for exactly 7 minutes during the gardener's morning routine. A brief window, but potentially enough for someone determined to slip away undetected. Sophie befriended Elena, a young housekeeper who seemed less intimidated by Romano than the other staff. Through careful conversations, she learned that Elena's brother worked as a taxi driver who sometimes picked up staff from the mansion's service entrance. He could take you into the city for a reasonable fee, Elena had offered innocently, unaware of Sophie's true intentions, if you ever need to run errands while Mr. Romano is away. Sophie memorized the phone number Elena provided, waiting until Wednesday night, when security would be focused on the weekly wine delivery. The mansion's landline in the library would be her only chance to make the call without surveillance. At precisely 10:43 p.m., she slipped from her bedroom with Lily bundled against her chest, a small bag of essentials hidden under the baby's blanket. The hallway stretched empty before her, dimmed lights casting long shadows across the marble floor. The library door creaked slightly as Sophie eased it open, heart hammering so loudly she feared it would wake Lily. 3 quick strides brought her to the antique desk where the phone sat like a beacon of freedom. Elena's brother answered on the second ring, confirming he could meet her at the service gate in 20 minutes. Sophie replaced the receiver with trembling fingers, turning to find the library no longer empty. Going somewhere? Romano's security chief Marco stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. His expression revealed nothing, but the phone in his hand suggested he'd already alerted his employer. Just looking for a book to help Lily sleep, Sophie lied, clutching her daughter closer. She's been fussy tonight. The practiced excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears, as Marco's impassive gaze dropped to the bag partially visible beneath Lily's blanket. Your loyalty to Elena is misplaced, Romano said hours later, after Marco had escorted Sophie back to her suite. He sat across from her in the sitting room adjoining her bedroom, where Lily now slept peacefully, unaware of her mother's failed escape attempt. Dawn was breaking outside the windows, painting the sky in watercolor streaks of pink and gold that belied the tension filling the room. Romano looked exhausted, his usual immaculate appearance slightly rumpled, as though he'd traveled through the night to return after receiving Marco's call. She was following my instructions, he continued, watching Sophie's expression shift from defiance to confusion. Testing your resourcefulness, your determination to protect your daughter at any cost. Sophie's anger flared hot and immediate. You set me up? Made me think I had a chance to escape just to see what I would do? The cruelty of such manipulation seemed excessive even for a man who had orchestrated her abduction. Romano leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped before him. I needed to be certain of your character before making my final offer. His voice had lost its usual commanding edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like vulnerability. I don't want any more of your offers, Sophie spat, wrapping her arms around herself as though the gesture could provide protection from whatever was coming next. I just want to leave with my daughter. Romano nodded as though he'd expected nothing less. What if leaving with Lily included a new identity, a house in any city of your choosing, a trust fund for her education, and enough money to ensure you never need work again unless you choose to? Sophie's retort died on her lips, suspicion replacing anger. Why would you do that? She asked, eyes narrowing. What could possibly be worth that level of generosity to someone you barely know? Because you're exactly the person Michael described, Romano replied, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a folded letter that showed signs of frequent handling. The letter he left in case of his death describes you as fiercely protective, stubbornly independent, and incapable of being bought. He placed the letter on the table between them, Michael's familiar handwriting visible even from where Sophie sat. Read it, Romano encouraged, sliding it toward her. Then you'll understand why I need someone exactly like you. Sophie hesitantly took the letter, her brother's words blurring through unshed tears as she read his final message, his love for her and Lily, his trust in Romano, and most surprisingly, his hope that she might someday help his friend find what he called a life beyond the family business. I don't understand, Sophie said, looking up from the letter in confusion. What does this have to do with your proposition? Romano pinched the bridge of his nose, revealing a momentary glimpse of the weight he carried. There are rumors of an impending RICO investigation targeting our entire operation, which means federal protection for anyone willing to testify against me. In my world, leaving my son without clear protection is tantamount to signing his death warrant, Romano continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. My enemies would use him as leverage or eliminate him entirely to prevent any future claims to my territory. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine at the casual way he discussed these horrifying possibilities. The contrast between his cold assessment and the obvious love for his son created a dissonance she couldn't quite reconcile. Alessandro's mother was not involved in my business. She was a concert pianist I met in Milan, Romano added, a softness creeping into his expression. She made me promise before she died that he would have choices she and I never had. I have a son, Romano stated simply, the words hanging in the air between them. A 10-year-old boy whose mother died in childbirth, who has known nothing but the shadows of my world, who needs a path different from mine. You want me to raise your son? Sophie asked incredulously, the pieces finally falling into place. That's why you brought me here. To be what, his nanny? His governess? Romano shook his head, his expression more serious than she'd yet seen it. I want you to be his guardian if anything happens to me, which is increasingly likely given certain recent business developments. He stood and crossed to the window, silhouetted against the brightening sky. The FBI has an informant in my organization. My rivals sense weakness. My lieutenants grow restless. I need to know Alessandro will be protected by someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Sophie struggled to process this unexpected revelation, the magnitude of what he was asking. You don't even know if I'm good with older children. Lily is still a baby. It's completely different. I've watched you with my staff's children during the garden party yesterday, Romano countered. You connected with each of them instantly, even the troubled 12-year-old who hasn't spoken to an adult in months. The memory of the sullen boy who had gradually opened up to her during the afternoon flashed through Sophie's mind. She hadn't realized Romano had been observing their interaction from his study window. Alessandro needs someone who sees him as a child first, not the heir to an empire, Romano continued, his voice softening. Someone who will guide him toward a legitimate future, rather than the path I inherited. There's a compound in Vermont, Romano explained, pulling up blueprints on the tablet. Remote, self-sufficient, with security systems that would rival most military installations, yet appearing to neighbors as nothing more extraordinary than a private estate. The property featured sprawling grounds, a lake, and facilities that would allow Alessandro to pursue any interest. Music studios, athletic fields, workshops, and a library that made Sophie's heart skip a beat. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. I've established shell corporations and trust funds that can never be traced back to me, he continued, scrolling through documents that represented years of careful planning. Your background in business administration would be essential for managing these assets. Sophie's mind raced with possibilities she'd never considered, raising 2 children in luxury and safety, but always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when the past might catch up to them. Was this truly better than the struggle she knew? You should know there's a time limit to consider, Romano added, his tone regaining its businesslike edge. My sources tell me the FBI plans to move within 6 weeks, which means our window for establishing Alessandro's new guardian situation, with or without you, closes rapidly. He returned to his seat, retrieving a tablet from the side table and sliding it toward Sophie. On the screen was a photo of a solemn-faced boy with his father's eyes, but a gentleness to his features that Romano's lacked. He's currently at a boarding school in Switzerland under an assumed name for his protection, Romano explained. He comes home only 3 times a year, and each time I see him pulling further away from me, becoming more isolated. Sophie touched the screen gently, something in the boy's expression tugging at her heart. If I agree to this arrangement, I'd want complete authority over his upbringing, she said, surprising herself with the condition. No interference from your organization. Romano nodded without hesitation. That's precisely what I want. Someone who will stand up to me when necessary, who will put his well-being above my wishes or business concerns. And Lily? Sophie pressed, needing absolute clarity. She would remain with me, under the same protections? We would never be separated? You and Lily would be family, Romano stated with finality, protected as such by all the resources at my disposal, with or without my continued existence. Sophie took a deep breath, weighing the impossible choice before her. I need to meet Alessandro first, she said finally, before I make any decisions. I need to know if he and I could form a genuine connection. Already arranged, Romano replied, checking his watch. The helicopter leaves in an hour. We'll be in Geneva by evening, and you'll have 3 days with Alessandro before deciding. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the room in golden light that seemed to illuminate the crossroads at which Sophie stood. Behind her, the life she'd known, struggling but independent. Ahead, a future entangled with a dangerous man and his vulnerable son. This isn't what Michael would have wanted for me, Sophie said softly, looking down at his letter once more. Getting involved with your world, the risks that come with it. Romano's expression softened for the first time since she'd met him. Michael wanted you safe, happy, and able to provide for Lily. Beyond that, He trusted your judgment more than anyone's, including mine. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lily's babbling came through the monitor on the side table. Sophie rose automatically, her motherly instincts overriding all other concerns. "I'll think about it during the flight," she said, moving toward the bedroom where her daughter waited. Romano remained seated, watching her with an expression that had shifted from commanding to hopeful. "That's all I ask," he said quietly, the mask of the untouchable mafia boss temporarily set aside to reveal something surprisingly human beneath. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is what keeps me creating content here. What do you think Sophie will decide? Let me know your predictions below.